Welcome to everybody who's coming in, like Ted, Peter, Jeff, and Jeff. Hello, Enid. We'll be starting in about 1 minute. Those of us in the northeast seem to be experiencing a heat wave. So those of you in the south, please be kind to us. We're just getting used to it. 90 in New York. That's crazy. More people are coming in. Welcome. Good to see you. All right. Well, why don't we get started? It's 2 o'clock here in Eastern Time Zone, and I want to welcome you all. Welcome to the Future Trends Forum. My name is Brian Alexander. I'm your host and cat herder for the next hour, and we have a lot of great and powerful stuff to talk about. So let's get started. First, if you haven't had a chance to introduce yourself, just go do so on the instant message box. Just say hello and where you're from. If you haven't done that before, I'll show you how in just a second. Christopher, why don't you advance the slide so we can get the introduction rolling? So one thing you should know is that this forum, this video conference, is an offspring of the Future Trends in Technology and Education report. And that's a monthly trends analysis that I publish. If you haven't had a chance to take a look at it, go to ftte.us and you can see back reports going back about 5 years. We're actually coming up on an anniversary pretty soon. And we've been looking at major trends in education and technology that give you a shot at trying to extrapolate what's coming next. So that's where we come from. Now, this is also a truly international discussion. Right now I'm speaking to you from the stage, but you should know that this is a global discussion that happens across multiple boundaries. So you can see from this map, we've had participants from just about every continent, not just all over North America and South America and across Europe, but also Central and Eastern Asia, in Australia and the Middle East. It's really important if we're going to be thinking about the future of higher education to be thinking about it globally, not just nationally. Now, we can only do this work with the help of some really powerful supporters, and I want to thank them and encourage you to help them. So first, NiserNet from upstate New York, actually throughout the state of New York, is a wonderful nonprofit that helps New York State universities, colleges, and libraries get online network. We're very grateful to them for their support. We're also really grateful to Shindig, because Shindig supports us in 2 ways: technology and people. People, because those are folks like Christopher today who will help us get all the things working, make sure the technology is succeeding, and make sure we're comfortable in this space. Now, speaking of the technology, let me just quickly mention there are 4 ways for you to interact with people here. Now, again, we really want this to be a discussion. So here are 4 ways you can contribute. If you can right on the screen, you'll see a little teal box that has 3 different white signals on it. The first one is a question. So if you have a question or a thought you'd like to share, click that, type it in, we'll flash it on the screen, and then I'll read it out loud. Now, if your mic and camera are working and you feel like talking up on stage, that's even better. Click the raised hand icon. That'll enter into our queue, and we'll bring you up on stage so you can ask me and better yet our guest questions and comments. Now, there's also a chat box. So if you mouse over that last little box, it looks like a kind of cartoon dialogue box. If you mouse over that, where I am will appear above that. Click that, and you'll have a discussion box with the 16 to 20 people who just come in the room with you. So right now, I'm in a room with Carrie, Christiana, Jeff, Peter, Ted, Ryan, Enid, Jennifer, Tara, Phil, Rodney, and a bunch of other people. And they're describing the terrible weather conditions they're laboring under, especially in the Northeast. So Enid, who's in Kentucky, is probably doing better than the rest of us. Now, the other way you can connect is on Twitter. So if you would like to, go on Twitter and use the hashtag FTTE, and we'll be able to track that. So again, as we go, please engage, share your thoughts, and be ready to contribute as you feel comfortable. Now, another source of support that really is crucial is on Patreon. We have a group of people who have been supporting my Future Trends in Technology and Education work there for about half a year. And this is kind of like Kickstarter, except it's aimed at creative people and keeping them alive and keeping them doing their creative work. So if you haven't seen this before, please go to patreon.com/Brian Alexander. And if you can, contribute. Every little bit helps. Now, on with the story. We're thinking about the future of education, trying to think about where universities and colleges could go in the near and medium term future. The crucial component of that is the academic library world. And over the past year and a half, we've engaged with libraries in many ways. We've also talked with the then head of a group called Ithaka S+R. They're a wonderful research and consulting outfit from New York City. And we're going to have today one of their members, Christine Wolff-Eisenberg, who is a researcher there. And she's going to be sharing with us the results of a very important detailed survey they did over the past 4 months. It just came out in April. It has a lot of information for us, and we're going to be asking her questions to try and see what it tells us about where academic libraries could go. So, Christopher, why don't you bring Christine up on stage?
Hi, Brian.
Welcome, Christine. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Oh, good. I can hear you perfectly.
Great.
So, well, welcome from New York. I'm glad you're inside in air conditioning and not melting outside on the pavement.
Definitely.
And welcome to the Future Trends Forum. I have so many questions to ask you. But to begin with, why don't you just quickly tell us, what do you do at Ithaka S+R?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, Ithaka S+R is a not-for-profit research and consulting service, part of the organization Ithaka, which also houses JSTOR, Portico, and ArtStore. And the kind of work that I do focuses on research, mostly survey research, focusing on helping libraries, publishers, scholarly societies better understand and ultimately better support learning, teaching, and research, often of students and of faculty members. So that's mostly what my work focuses on. And I'm having a bit of technical difficulties.
Just had temporary
that's okay. Did we get disconnected for a second there?
No, I did. It's okay.
Okay.
I'm back. What I was saying was, this is vital work that you're doing right now, as we're trying to understand how, not just how academic libraries, but how higher education as a whole is beginning to change and transform. Let me just make sure I've got this right. And friends, if you haven't had a chance to read the report, I strongly recommend it. It's very elegantly written, and it's packed with information. If I understand this correctly, about 6 months ago, back in November and December, you pinged about a third of American higher education, like 1,500 institutions across the U.S., and half of those responded, right?
Yes. So we invited, just about 1,500 respondents. I think we had 722 that ended up participating. We're really so grateful that so many took the time to participate and share their perspectives on the work that they do and the work that their organizations also do.
And this is remarkable, friends. If the numbers don't connect to anything, there's roughly 4,400 colleges, institutions, and so forth across the U.S. So what Ithaka just did successfully was surveyed about 20% of them, which is a remarkable achievement. It's remarkable to get 2% of them, much less 20%.
Yeah, I should say for this survey, just for kind of setting the stage, the way that we defined the population and the way that we have in previous survey cycles is that we survey 4-year not-for-profit colleges and universities. So we are excluding, obviously, community colleges, other special kinds of institutions.
You tended to get more responses from doctoral and research universities and a bit less from baccalaureate degrees, right?
Yes. So that's consistent with what we've seen in previous cycles. We do tend to get higher rates of participation from doctoral university, from respondents from doctoral universities. And often there are, as you know, I'm sure you saw in the report, there are a lot of differences with responses from individuals at different types of institutions. So we do break it out very often by Carnegie classification. So we separate out those baccalaureate colleges from those master's institutions, from those doctoral universities, to highlight a lot of those differences.
So as we proceed, friends, just two things to keep in mind. One is that you want to think about your own institution and how, try to imagine your own library and how that might fit into this. But also, I think by the end, we're going to take care to draw on some of these differences and see how the master's degree, how the PhD granting, and how the baccalaureate-only institutions really differ. But I have a whole bunch of questions, and I just want to, if I could, just start with a couple of them. I want to make sure I understand the report correctly. It seems, first of all, that you've detected a resource shift going on, where libraries are pushing more of their resources, by resources I mean money and time primarily, towards instructional and research support. Some more resources towards the digital world, although that might be slowing down, and fewer resources towards print. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we're seeing this in a number of ways, that some of which you've already highlighted, in terms of positions. So we ask library deans and directors, people in those kinds of positions. We ask them about the areas in which they anticipate adding and reducing positions in the next few years or so. And we're seeing a lot of interest in adding positions to those related to information literacy and to research support for faculty members. So in terms of positions, where we are seeing this shift from focusing just on collections, or in such a large part on collections, to shifting towards services a bit. And then in terms of the shift within what's happening with collection strategies, we also are seeing a shift, as you mentioned, from print to electronic. We're seeing increased spending on e-books, e-journals, as compared to previous cycles of the survey. It's probably worth mentioning that the survey is run every 3 years. So we have results from 2010, from 2013, and now from 2016. So we've seen this trend of print spending decreasing, electronic resource spending increasing, and we also see that library directors are continuing to predict that spending will go in that same direction in the future. So we have every reason to expect that it will continue.
It's really, really important to see. As part of the decrease in print collections, do you think, I'm not sure I caught this from the survey, do you think we're seeing a greater shift to off-site collection storage for academic libraries?
Yeah, so we do ask respondents if they have developed policies for deaccessioning print materials when an electronic version is also available. It's kind of buried there in the report, but in 2013, the first time we fielded that question, something like maybe 30% of respondents had these kind of policies in place for when there was both a digital and a print format, and what to do with the print format item. So we saw that in 2013. In this most recent survey cycle, we saw that that share of respondents just about doubled. Somewhere around 60% of respondents have now developed these policies for what to do. So yeah, some of that is certainly shifting print materials offsite.
So this could be seen as yet another step on the way towards well, it's not the all digital library, but the mostly digital library.
Yeah, so there's a lot of comfort with switching from print journals, obviously, to electronic journals. For books and monographs, we haven't seen quite the same level of enthusiasm from both library deans and directors. So those people who are running these organizations, but also we run, some of you may be familiar with the IthakaS&R US and UK faculty surveys. So we also survey faculty members on a triennial basis. And in both the UK and the US, we're seeing that faculty members and library directors, for that part, are also in this kind of dual format environment for books and monographs. Not so much with journals at this point, but that both the print and the electronic monographs seem to be useful for different kinds of activities, and there hasn't just been as much of a transition as we might have expected.
I just have to say, in the chat box, Phil Katz asks us to make sure that we distinguish between collection deaccessioning and offsite storage, which aren't the same thing.
Yes.
That's a really good point. And before I continue rolling on with my interrogation, please jump in like Phil did. Hurl up your questions and comments and thoughts, because there's a lot going on here. One other result of your study that I thought was really, it made sense to me anecdotally and made me sad, but I thought it was a very, very important one to pull out, is that the library directors don't seem to see faculty viewing the teaching support as happening as much. And it was something like 50% of faculty thought that was significant. I may get the number wrong. Can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, do you mean in terms of the support that libraries are lending to students? Is that might be what you're...
Lending to students or to teaching? So the combination of students and faculty.
Yeah. So in terms of supporting student learning, for example, there are some major gaps between what we're seeing with library directors and with faculty members. So one example is that we ask both faculty members. We asked them in 2015, and library directors in this most recent survey cycle in 2016. We asked them to indicate how strongly they agreed that their students have poor research skills. And we saw that a much greater share of faculty agreed that their students have poor research skills as compared to library deans and directors. However, when you ask them how strongly they agree that librarians contribute to student learning and to the development of student research skills, library directors very strongly agree. Something like 80% of them agree that librarians are contributing in this way, as opposed to about something like 50% of faculty members. So faculty members see this as more of a problem, but they don't necessarily, as compared to library deans and directors, but they don't necessarily see the library as the solution, or at least the only responsible entity for developing these skills in their students.
So that's a gap. That's an important gap. And if I may, I connect that to another one of your findings, and let me just quote from the study. Library directors feel increasingly less valued by, involved with, and aligned strategically with their supervisors and other senior academic leadership. So in this case, supervisors are VPs or chief academic officers and campus senior administration. So that's an interesting gap. Can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah. So one finding that has been constant across the survey cycles is that library deans and directors see having a lack of financial resources as the most major constraint on their ability to enact change within their organizations. And that hasn't changed over the survey cycles. It's always the item that respondents rate as their number one constraint. However, something that has changed that you've highlighted here is that there are a number of questions within the survey where we ask about how library deans and directors feel about their vision and how it aligns with their supervisor's vision, and if they feel like a member of the senior academic leadership on their campus. And for all of those markers, we're seeing decreases, and we're seeing that library deans and directors are feeling less connected to, less valued by, perhaps, by their parent institutions.
And this is I don't want to harp on the negative I think personally, I think this is negative finding. I mean, this makes me sad, but this is an important important point to identify, and I think folks, you want to pay attention to this yourself at your institutions and where you see that coming. Let me take a step back to one of the points that we touched on. You mentioned that there's a rise in e-resources spending. So that's buying licenses for e-journals and for e-books, monographs, and so forth. But you also have this curious point that this may be about to peak, or that the spending may shift to new materials, because I think, if I get this right, so much of faculty reading is already done electronically. Can you clarify my fuzziness about that?
Yeah, so there was a question in the survey about interest in investing in non-textual resources, and there appeared to be a lot of interest from library deans and directors saying that they would be shifting their collections, or that they would be interested in shifting their collections, or that they see this shift happening in the future towards new material types. But when you ask them to break out how their budget allocations would be in 5 years from now, we're not quite seeing that there's that prediction that other kinds of items would be incorporated more into their collection. So that was you're right to be a bit fuzzy on that. It's a bit of a puzzling kind of finding there.
So what would a non-textual item be? Would that be, say, for example, rich media, movies,
Yes.
VR, would be data?
Yes. At least that's how we interpreted it. Maybe part of the reason here why we're seeing that what we interpret as a bit of a discrepancy, perhaps respondents interpreted it in a different kind of way than we intended. So that's something for us to think about in the next survey cycle, if perhaps there was something that could be tweaked there.
Maybe 2019.
Yeah.
In which case you'll have people will be asking you, let me tell you about my new mixed reality level. And they may have that. Well, along with this, a major, I think, when looking at all of your graphs and thinking about the different numbers for results, it seems like a major shift that's ongoing is the declining value of libraries as discovery starting points and discovery engines.
Yes.
That, I mean, even I think you said even interest in LibGuide seems to be going down. Where is this going? We know where it's coming from. It's coming from people starting online through Google, et cetera.
Yeah.
But where do you think that's going? How far do you think it'll go?
So we see this reflected in both our studies of library deans and directors and of faculty members. So I'll start with faculty members, since they're the ones actually executing these kinds of practices. So we have been tracking starting points for research with faculty members going back as far as I think 2003, and for a long time, consistently, the most frequent place where researchers would begin their process was with a specific e-resource or a specific database, and that was pretty constant. Other things shifted a bit, but we saw that pretty constantly until the 2015, the most recent cycle of our faculty survey, when more and more respondents are starting with, for example, a general purpose search engine. So yes, some of what you mentioned certainly is driving that. And, of course, in a corresponding fashion, we've also seen with library deans and directors that they aren't as interested anymore as being the place for research to start. And perhaps this is because of what they're recognizing with the rise of other kinds of starting points that faculty members and students as well are using.
Are they less interested because, in a sense, the battle is over and they are happy to help people once they get going in their research to continue with information literacy and digital resources and so forth?
Yeah, that is certainly one very possible explanation, that if they're not going to win out on this front, perhaps resources are better allocated towards another area within the library.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. Let me put up a question here from Phil Katz, who, as usual, has a very thoughtful comment. He wants to know, with the decrease in spending on digital resources, has there been an increase in efforts to gauge usage and demand for such resources?
Usage and demand for such resources. We didn't in this survey cycle ask about those kinds of questions. We certainly are seeing more demand for usage from faculty members. In our survey of faculty, we see that electronic versions of both journals and monographs are increasingly important. Although for monographs, as I mentioned, there's still a need for print for certainly many kinds of activities. So we don't have as much of a perspective from library directors in how they're gauging interest on this. But we do have some perspectives from faculty members, certainly.
Well, this is something I think that's very, very important, especially if we, Phil, please follow this up if I'm misreading you, but that connects really interestingly with, for example, the sense of disconnect from campus leadership and the sense that faculty are not quite on the same page as library leadership and seeing the function of perhaps one way to win back attention and support would be to have solid data showing the actual usage of electronic resources. And Phil is probably going to show me why that is not quite what he's saying, but I'm waiting to hear back from him as he goes. Again, for everybody else, please keep in mind, jump in as you go. There's a lot that we can really pull out here. If libraries are becoming less and less significant in terms of starting the research process, they do seem in your report to be increasing in terms of information literacy, in terms of resources and in new hires. Can you say a bit about that?
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of interest from library deans and directors in supporting student success, especially, and some of that would encompass information literacy. There was something like 80 to 90% of respondents said that supporting student success was their number one priority, even at doctoral universities, for example. That it was something like 70% of respondents said that was their top priority, even when they have these other research support related responsibilities.
Wow.
So there definitely is a lot of interest and a lot of effort going towards that area. One challenge that libraries seem to be facing, at least from our findings, is that while so many of them are committed to this, something like half of them, or maybe 40% of them, said that they haven't yet clearly articulated their library's contributions, or maybe that they have difficulty articulating their library's contributions towards student success. So that seems to be an area where perhaps more work could be focused.
Oh, that makes sense. I like how those different dimensions tie together. I'm doing a lot of work in information and digital literacy, so I'm always happy to see this. But at the same time, another change seems to be starting to occur, and please clarify this if possible. It seems that library directors have a new role, or a role that's rising, which is fundraising. That seemed to be a very, very small role in the 2010 to 2013 survey, but that seemed to be really growing right now. Am I overstating that, or is that a thing?
I can't recall off the top of my head what the shifts were from previous years, but what I do know is that the way that library directors allocate their time based on their Carnegie classification, based on the type of institution they're at, doesn't differ so much by institution type. But what does differ is that fundraising portion. So they tend to spend their time in similar ways, but library directors at doctoral universities tend to spend less time on management activities, probably because they have plenty of other staff under them. They have more of a hierarchy set up there to do that. So they tend to spend less time doing that, and relatively more time as compared to their peers at other institution types on fundraising.
I'd keep an eye on that, especially if the financial pressures are, as you suggested, beginning to weigh on them. In
Yeah,
fact, there
that'll
was
be interesting to see.
well, it seemed that you had one observation that some directors didn't think they were being singled out for financial cuts or financial stresses. It seemed that they saw their whole campus as being uh, how do you put it, in a competitive environment, and that all units are being impacted equally. Um, and that's interesting.
Yeah, we asked them about, if the changes to their library felt like they were commensurate with what else was happening on their campus, and we didn't get a ton of reaction in opposition to that. So while they are feeling financially restrained, in a lot of ways, there wasn't a lot of pushback to say that the library was being singled out in that way.
Well, it's good. I mean, that's a in many. I mean, it's. I mean, you've seen some of the forum work before. I mean, we've been talking about the economic pressures on American higher education for a while. So, in a sense, this is bad news that everyone's being hurt. But it's good news for the library role, and that they're not being singled out. They're not, in particular, being hit.
Sure.
Um, on a related note, there was a fascinating finding, and then I want to throw this up in for more discussion about the kinds of positions that people were willing to add to, and how that was different than 2013. And one was that they were focused on specialized faculty research support. So that included more on GIS, data management, and digital humanities. That's really important because those are fields that aren't brand new, but just keep growing in size and significance. Where do you think that's going to go? Do you think that's going to become, will those become major functions for the academic library in a few years?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. One one thing that we're also seeing in that same set of findings is that the share of respondents who said that they were going to add to all other types of positions besides those that
Right.
support specialized faculty research were all smaller than they had been in previous years. So meaning that a smaller share of respondents thinks that they're going to add positions in all of the other kinds of positions that we asked about in the survey. So yeah, it'll be really interesting to see in what direction that shifts, especially in light of the way that fewer positions were anticipated to be added as compared to 3 years ago.
Well, this is a transition moment, but we may really be seeing a different complexion for library personnel. Well, every just about every session of the Future Trends Forum, at halfway through, we do what's called the mingle session. And the way this works is that the guest, you and I, climb down off the stage and we jump into the crowd below. And the idea is for the next 5 minutes for us to have small group conversations, small, like 2, 3, or 4 people. And the idea that I would like to ask everyone to think of, your conversation starter, is to ask, where are you seeing these trends that Christine has revealed at your institution? So if you work at a college or academy, or if you work at a university, how are you seeing these play out? Everything from the shift in collection development to resources to research support. I mean, how are you seeing those play out? And if you're in an academic library, please, what do you think? Does this describe what you're doing? And what does it mean for the future of your institution? So now the way this works technically is very easy. And you can see from the bottom half of the screen that there are all these boxes. Each box is one sign-in, usually one person. And it's either going to be represented by a person who's looking at us, like there's Enid, who is looking at us now with a white sweater. Hello, Enid. And sometimes it's from a person who doesn't have their video camera on for whatever reason, like, say, Nancy or Yvonne. What you can do is you go and click on one of those other pictures. And if the person wants to talk with you, your two boxes will click together like Legos, and you'll get your own private video audio conference motion. Now, if you don't want to talk to somebody because, say, your camera and mic don't work, or you have a mouthful of food, or you're in a public place, or whatever, just refuse the connection. No problem. That's perfectly allowed. And we'll do this for the next 5 minutes. And then I'd like to grab a couple of you guys to join us back up on stage so we can continue the conversation. All right, so let's get down and do this. We'll mingle for the next 5 minutes. think about what comes next. Well, welcome back. Welcome back. It's been good to mingle with people. Now we're going to test out just how many people a shindig can put on the stage at the same time. So it used to be only 2. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So along with our guest, Christine, we have Vicky Romano and Ted Newcomb, long-standing Future Trends fans. Welcome, guys.
Thanks.
So Vicky was asking a question about creating a new space on campus in the library, a learning commons, and it was one which, Vicky, if I misphrase this, please correct me. It seems like it's a notion right now. They're just starting to make it work, but you were looking to make it into something much more vibrant.
Well, I'd like to see it as an actual commons as opposed to just a sign above a bank of computers. Like, how can you get those spaces, I mean, respected? Because we have quiet spaces, we have loud spaces, we have wonderful, beautiful spaces. I was also saying we also have exercise bikes available here in the library. So it really is becoming a nice hub. But how can we make that space? And again, me bridging the technology and what's available with the librarians who have their kind of practices set. How can I bridge those areas so they're a true commons and not just a sign, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I'm
great
kind of wondering if this is, besides being maybe a signage kind of issue, are individuals on your campus aware of this space? I wonder if it has to do with how the space is actually, designed, or whether it's just an awareness issue, for example.
Well, I think part of it is awareness. I'm a higher energy person. So when my office came here, I wanted to bring people here. I wanted to show people. In fact, I'm holding more faculty development sessions in the library classroom so that faculty become aware of these things as part of their daily life, as opposed to come see this and eat a cookie kind of event. So I'm trying to make the spaces that are here so that they see the sign information commons and they could say, oh, maybe I could meet with students here about something. So I'm trying to get it to be part of the culture. I've also always been very the model of a technologist, a librarian, a faculty member. There's nothing that can stop that combination. So I'm trying to bring that also, since my position is new, that I'm bridging with librarians and faculty, because I don't think faculty use the resources of the library as much as they should. So again, I'm trying to reestablish and rebuild those connections that I think get lost over time, right? People change and grow, and your librarian leaves and you're kind of sad and things get shifted. So I'm trying to hold things here so that it's part of, oh, I go to the library to learn about Canvas, but also I can get my readings, that type of connection.
That sounds like a project that you should be in charge of as an evangelical person.
Yeah, I'm in charge of Standard 2 for North Central accreditation right now. So until that gets written.
Well, that's a good one.
I have the wrong skill set.
Oh, you're good. You're good. Christine, would you say overall that, and this, I don't think this came up in the survey, so forgive me if it's off base, but would you say overall there's continued interest in developing and expanding learning commons in academic libraries?
Yeah, it's not something that we did specifically ask about, but we certainly do see, library spaces transforming in a number of ways, that, books in many cases are being moved off-site or being deaccessioned or being turned into these more interactive, collaborative kinds of spaces. So we didn't ask about that specifically, but I can certainly see a number of places where those findings would indicate something like that.
Well, that's good to know. That's another transition that we should be thinking about as this goes. And so,
yeah,
Vicky,
I should mention there was a question in the survey that just came to mind about if you had an extra 10% added to the existing existing budget that you have, what would you do with that? And the top answer, and this was consistent with the previous cycle, was that respondents would want to hire more people or redefine existing positions. But the second place item, the one that respondents most frequently wanted to allocate additional resources to, were facilities and expansions. And that, I believe for that item, we saw quite an increase in the share of respondents that wanted to invest additional resources into that, as opposed to the other options that we outlined. So there definitely is some evidence to point to for that.
Well, good. This is another trend that we really need to be keeping an eye on. Ted and Vicki, stick with us for a second up on stage, because we have another question here from Jeff Bullington, who would join us, but he's having tech difficulties. No problem. So let me just read this out, because this question is related. He asks, as surveys look at library director and faculty viewpoints, how can you get higher level administrators' viewpoints about the library? Jeff, forgive me if I'm getting this wrong, but I think you're talking about, say, academic deans, VPs, presidents, maybe trustees, that kind of thing.
So I can just jump in. I don't know that this addresses that specifically. So there are two kinds of teams within IthakaS&R. There's a libraries and scholarly communications team, and then there's an educational transformation team that deals with issues in higher education a bit more broadly, focusing a bit more perhaps on technology and how that transforms the educational experience. And they run a survey of, I believe it's called the Higher Ed Insights Survey, where they survey, it's a panel of maybe 100, 200 thought leaders in higher education about their perspectives. And I don't know that too much is indicated about the library specifically, but we are starting to gather some of these kinds of perspectives through that project. I believe that they're going to field a survey, the next cycle of that, very shortly, and probably we'll see a report out on that over the summer.
Could you repeat the name of that again? There was the name of the panel?
Yeah, I believe it's called the Higher Ed Insights Panel. If you go to the S&R website, it's sr.ithaka.org. Under the publications, I'm sure you'll be able to find the most recent cycle of that was probably from, I'm guessing, from fall 2016. I believe that's run every semester or 2 times a year or something like that.
So much more frequently than the library survey.
Yeah, it is. It's a different kind of methodology. They're surveying the same panel of about 100, 200, something like that, respondents who have kind of opted in to participating in this. So you probably are more able to ping them frequently on this if it's something that they've agreed to participate in an ongoing kind of fashion.
Well, good. Well, we'll have to look for that. And I think I mean everyone. This is rich stuff. So how about the rest of you after your mingle session and after you had a chance to reflect on these trends, why don't you share with us your thoughts? So either take a minute in the chat box, which is burning up in my room right now, or click the raise hand if you want to join us, come to stage with Ted and Vicki along with Christine, or just click the question box if you want us to read one out loud. And meanwhile, before I read a question, over on Twitter, people have been sharing a lot of retweets, but Kisa shared this great series of images, which is basically libraries doing absolutely everything. It was librarians as heroes, allies, and very calm people to make research better. So it's definitely almost like superheroes at this point. Nancy, thank you for sharing the URL. I really appreciate that. So while you guys are typing in your own questions, let me ask Christine. I've got one more from me. I have a bunch, actually. But I was trying to tie together everything that you were describing. I wanted to explain the survey to people who hadn't read it. And I thought I could do this from a futurist perspective of imagining what it means for libraries 5 or 10 years from now. And what do you think of this picture? Just tell me how how crazy this is or how wrong. One is that libraries in a few years would be closely related to educational technology, in that their focus would be really closely involved in helping students, faculty, and digital media interact productively. They maintain licenses for content that is digital content that's widely used, and the physical collection that's dwindling in both content and usage. Um, Libraries are active but increasingly isolated on campus politically. Does that sound like a plausible extrapolation from the trends you've described?
Yeah, that sounds very accurate. That we'll be serving or shifting towards services as opposed to collections. Although the role of the library in providing collections is the role that uh, many stakeholders on campus see as the most important role of the library. So I can't quite imagine that pulling back too much. But that shift is definitely underway.
Well, I'm glad for me. Yes, I scored one, but that might we'll have to keep an eye on that and see if I'm extrapolating correctly. We have another question here. Actually, a question from Kisa. Christopher, can you flash it on the screen? Um, and she begins, of course, with a great deal of energy. I love libraries. They're cultural center points of how we learn. My question is, how are virtual libraries helping within the shaping of libraries identify for the future? And Kisa, if I've mangled that, please jump in the chat box and let me know.
Yeah, so we don't really focus too much on that, and I don't know that so many of our projects focus on libraries that are virtual entirely. I want to make sure I
Oh, I'm
understand. Oh,
sorry. I think
Lisa.
hey, how are you doing?
Yeah.
I was probably typing too fast. Well, I'm noticing that there are quite a few virtual libraries popping up, and some of them are very, very good and very extensive, like on how they share information. So I was wondering, like, how does that fit in with the libraries kind of reimagining themselves, re-identify themselves? Because me personally, I've always thought the library was much more than what people saw. I don't know, like I can tell a lot about a city or a school depending on how the
Mm,
library is operated, you know, and what
mhm,
resources
mhm.
are made available, what type of librarians are in there, because librarians are different. Like they're different types of people, and I love talking to them because they're all uniquely different, and that's what I like about them. But yeah, so how does that fit in with you guys re-identifying who you are or where you're going, the virtual libraries?
Yeah, so just in terms of thinking about library as a physical space versus the online library, we are certainly seeing that, at least in our faculty survey, and I'm sure we would see this from students as well, that nationally there's a decline in people who are in faculty, for example, who are starting their research in the physical library. A lot of them are using the library digitally, or they're going elsewhere to start their research, for example. So I think that the ways that we, just jumping off of that a little bit, the ways that we need to measure the library's impact also are going to need to shift, and are shifting accordingly. That just in library usage um, isn't necessarily going to be the way that we measure engagement with the library. The library is much more than just a physical building, although it's the physical building can be great for the library and for the campus, um, more broadly, as well. The library often plays the library space often plays roles that even extend beyond the library. Like you said, people visiting libraries in different cities, admissions tours going through the library. So the space definitely plays an important role, both in a traditional sense and in kind of an alternative way.
Yeah, I also because I'm a designer, I'm a learning designer, and I make sure any faculty member that, at least if they utilize the services and they utilize me, I'm like, oh, we need a librarian. And they're like, what? I'm like, they're going to make the course smarter. Let's get a librarian, and we kind of sit in and we do a design, and we look at each other as co-educators, design an experience for the students, and it helps out so much.
Great.
I think you guys are amazing.
That's great.
Well, Kisa, don't go away, because we always need more Kisa, I think.
Thank you, Brian. I'm here.
Just so you know, I mean, I'm sharing your passion. I've got this. I'm in a public library right now, so
Oh, that's cool. That's cool.
We have a couple more questions before we run completely out of time, and one is from Roxanne, who wants to know: do you see open resources as becoming more receptive for all stakeholders? Which is a great question, given as we were describing before, the amount of resources being spent on electronic resources.
Yeah, so we ask one question in the survey of library deans and directors that asks these respondents if multiple copies of similar copies of the same item exist in multiple places, is it important that the library guide users to a preferred source? And the way that we thought of this was, if there's an open access version, if there's one that's behind a paywall, how important is it to library directors that they guide their users, or that their librarians guide users to a preferred source? And we saw a bit of a shift downward. So fewer library directors in this cycle were interested in guiding their users in that way. So it's something that we're going to want to keep an eye on. I'm not sure if perhaps there was a different interpretation of the question than what we might have intended. There certainly does seem to be a lot of interest in open access resources. Yeah. A lot of institutions are involved in projects to try to get faculty on board with that, incorporated into their syllabus. But we saw a bit of a conflicting finding there from the library director survey. And so it's something for us to think about, maybe do a bit more research on.
Oh, I have a question real quick, Christine, for someone. How accessible would the library be to users who are not a part of the institution?
Oh, not alumni, not affiliated in any kind of way.
Well, like more so like the community. Say, for instance, here, I'll say, I know I should be asking the Michigan State librarian, but Michigan State, and the community wanted to come in, and they wanted to do a project, and they wanted to utilize the resources. So how accessible are that, based upon the library's viewpoint? Like, how accessible would that be to the broader community?
Yeah, I think that this is just going to differ a lot from institution to institution, specific policies, and certainly would differ a lot for private versus public universities, for example.
Well, that's if I can jump in for a second, this has come up a few times over the past couple of years. When I've spoken to a few different librarians, they position themselves as information entrepreneurs. And when they describe that, they initially describe it as leaping out into in the community they serve, into the campus community, with faculty and students to help them find stuff. But then they also describe it as something that might be best done with a larger community. And Kisa, a few minutes ago, I don't know if you saw this part, I was asking about the small but rising tendency of library directors to consider themselves fundraisers.
Yes. Yep, I caught that.
So I wonder if you're in Michigan State. I can tell because there's a green wall behind you, right?
Oh yeah. Look, and you can write on it too.
Whoa! Oh, I totally would. I would write Ann Arbor all over it. But you should so hypothetically, then a librarian from MSU's library would go out into the East Lansing community and look for a startup company, or maybe in the state government, a public utility, to try and connect them with resources, and that would be fulfilling the library's mission, but also perhaps bringing in resources, perhaps bringing in funds. Friends, I have to pause this because we are out of time. It is the end of the hour. It's 3 on the East Coast, where we're all drowning in humidity and heat. But we're also lavished with your research and your brilliance, Christine. Thank you so much for sharing your resources with us, for sharing your research. You're giving us this deep glimpse into where libraries are going. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me, Brian. This is great.
Oh, I hope to come back and get more from you as we go.
Great.
We have some comments and thoughts in the chat box from Ted and Roxanne and Jeff. They're just lighting up like crazy. This is obviously a very, very important topic. But I need to bring up our slides for next week so we can talk about it. And as those slides come, let me just thank everybody. Thank you all for your questions, for either that you've typed in the chat box or read out loud yourselves or had in front of me. Next week, next Friday, keep in mind there's a day shift. Just next week is Friday, not Thursday. We'll have a guest who I believe will be in South Africa at the time. Taskim Adam, who is a PhD candidate in developmental studies at the University of Cambridge, who's been researching the differences between nations in educational technology. She has some very, very provocative insights into how MOOCs and online learning in general play out between the global North and the global South. I'm very, very excited to see her here next week. So reserve that in your calendar. Now, if you'd like to learn more, if you'd like to spend more time thinking about these issues, of course, ftte.us will give you some more reports. The May report is still hot off the presses. If you'd like to learn more about the technology, there's shindig.com, so you can learn more about this awesome video technology. And if you don't have enough reading to do, our book club is continuing to work our way through Tressie Cottom's Lower Ed. We are entering the third chapter of our reading so far. A very, very powerful book, an extremely accessible and engaging reading. I strongly recommend it. Now, I'll be here for another minute in with the crowd to chat, but otherwise, thank you so much for coming. Keep thinking about libraries and the future of higher education. See you next time. Bye-bye.